It's September 15th, and I just got the card, and I haven't run any benchmarks yet. I have no idea what I'm gonna be able to do in this. Actually, you know what? I do know what I'm gonna do. I'm going to test this in a super unorthodox fashion. I can't really give you a full-fledged, proper review of this card like many of their tech tubers I'm sure are going to do on the 16th of September, which is, I'm sure, when you're watching this video. Instead, I'm going to do something crazy, something that I doubt you will see in your day one coverage. I'm going to pair the almighty RTX 3080 with an AMD FX 8350. Yeah. The stylish Be Quiet Shadow Rock 3 offers exceptional cooling while maintaining a silent profile thanks to a PWM Shadow Wings 2 fan. And with a 190 watt TDP, expect plenty of overclocking headroom. Click the link below to learn more. Let's go ahead and get the mini unboxing out of the way here. I can do this one-handed. Wow. That is one sexy card. So this is the Nvidia RTX 3080 Founders Edition. It's actually a 2-fan card. One fan is where it should be, and the other fan is up here. Yeah. These are your rear I/O options. You get a single HDMI port and 3 display ports. This particular model also has a unique 12-pin connector for supplemental power, which means you're gonna need a weird dongle, and it's gonna make your custom cables and anything that's not stock look super awkward. Yeah. Now, something you might not have noticed about this card at first glance, you can kind of see through the shroud there. The PCB is actually shaped a bit weird on the side further away from the rear I/O. It's actually like a concave V shape, and perhaps that explains more or less why they went with this strange connector. I don't know. You do at least get the adapter in the box though, so we're not being totally fooled here. Now this here is the CPU. We're gonna pair it with the 3080, and depending on who you ask, this is either a 4-core 8-thread chip or an 8-core 8-thread chip. It shares a few resources, including the FPU between 2 different logical cores, and yeah, there's been a class action lawsuit. This CPU is rather infamous by this point, but there are still a few applications for it, and if you can find it cheap on eBay, it's not too bad a purchase for an ultra budget build. Anyway, for whatever reason, I'm going to use this as my CPU of choice. We're gonna run the 3080 in this system here. We're gonna pair this with I think it's a 970 gaming from MSI, something along those lines. And then also we'll swap that graphics card out for a 2080 and see what the increase in performance looks like between the 2 generations. So let's go ahead and get the CPU installed. And while we're here, I do have 16 gigs of DDR3 installed into the system, 4 gig DIMMs apiece. Now we just need a CPU cooler. It is so weird installing a CPU cooler over an AM3 socket. I've become so accustomed to AM4 and Ryzen. All right, V750 power supply from Cooler Master is in there. I think 750 watts will be plenty for this system. We're not gonna do any crazy overclocking or anything. Also, the case we're using is a Corsair 4000D Airflow, which actually just released today as of time of filming. So that's pretty convenient, and it's an Airflow-centric case, so yeah, it's gonna be pretty optimal for the graphics card and the CPU. And be sure to check temperatures throughout, make sure nothing is running too crazily hot, although I have a feeling that these new Founders Edition cards are going to be quite efficient on the cooling side of things. Anyway, let's get it installed and then we'll fire it up. All right, I'm really hating this adapter, but it's the best we can do. Now, time to fire it up. Now, while the 3080 is in this system, I want to show you what it looks like turned on. So you do have a white GeForce RTX logo off to the right, and you also have 2 LEDs that sort of diffuse on the top of the card. So as long as you don't have anything above this, you should be able to see it. This would be more or less the back plate of this particular model. The issue that I have though aesthetically with this card, it's got to be the adapter. And I kind of thought about this when I first realized that we were going to need a special adapter for this. Again, one is included with the card, which is great. I mean, that's convenient, I guess, but that's also the negative of this card. I think it's the one complaint that I have. I've already benchmarked it. I'll show you the side-by-side comparisons between this and the 2080 in a second, but this right here is a deal breaker for me with regards to this particular model, the one straight from Nvidia, the Founders Edition card. It's a great card all around. Temperatures are okay, and this isn't the best system to gauge temperatures because we weren't really GPU bound in a lot of the scenarios you're about to see, but this adapter is just ridiculous. It looks so awful. It covers the GeForce RTX logo. I'm not sure how they expected you to be able to route this, and it's just clunky. It ruins the aesthetic. It's such a sleek card with such an awkward adapter. Like, Why? But enough about aesthetics. How does this card perform when paired with our FX 8350? I'm sure you can imagine it doesn't fare too well. Also, the RTX 2080 we use is an Asus Strix model. It's priced comparably to what the MSRP of this card is, about $699. The 2080s back then were going for around that, maybe a bit more for the super special AIB models. But anyway, I think it's a fair comparison from a price perspective, and it shows the generational leap, what you're getting extra for the price this time around with the Ampere architecture. Brace yourselves, these benchmarks are freaking cringy. So I kicked things off with 3D Mark Time Spy Extreme. That's a DX12 4K synthetic designed to push both CPUs and GPUs to their performance limits, respectively and separately, I might add. You'll be looking at a side-by-side comparison for each of these tests so that you can see just how heavily bottlenecked each scenario is. And if it sounds like I'm kind of out of it, maybe out of breath, a little tired. Yeah, at this point it's 3:12 a.m., a few hours to go until the embargo lifts. So yeah, keep in mind that we're running these cards at stock with an FX 8150 overclocked to 4.5 gigahertz and 16 gigs of DDR3. This particular section of the Time Spy Extreme test leverages the GPU, hence the high percent usage up top for each run. This means the CPU will have little impact on our frame rate, though we can see increased usage on the RTX 3080 side on account of the card's ability to render additional frames per second. That said, the CPU heavy test you're seeing here is absolutely horrid for the FX processor, shoving out 1 frame every 500 milliseconds or 2 FPS, 2 frames per second. You just multiply that by 2. And it stayed like this the entire time. This scene normally takes like 10 or so, well, actually more than that, about 20 seconds, depending on the system. But with this particular system, it took over 5 minutes. Yeah, so we're not off to a great start. This drastically impacted overall Time Spy Extreme scoring, though the cards individually put on a strong showing. All in, the 3080 here is roughly 70% stronger than the 2080 when the CPU is hardly utilized. I tested GTA 5 next because it was a highly requested game on Twitter with this configuration. This is 1080p with 2 times frame scaling and max settings everywhere else, including 8 times anti-aliasing and all advanced graphics enabled. You can see how the RTX 3080 isn't working as hard as the 2080 throughout this scene, and that's a result of heavy CPU bottlenecking. Yeah, the 2080 may be pegging near 100% usage, but don't be fooled, the CPU is still largely holding things back, which comes down to an optimization issue, meaning this is game specific and actually it's architecture specific as well. We'll talk about that later. Another way to tell is that the 3080 and 2080 are both reeling in roughly the same frame rate, and we know from the previous test that the former is capable of much more than the latter. So let's try a GPU intensive title like Witcher 3, but in the same resolution. And yeah, story is the same. This is Witcher 3, literally max settings, and our frame rates are virtually indistinguishable. The RTX 2080 is notably working a bit harder than its Ampere counterpart, but both systems are still hindered by the bulldozer architecture. The game isn't optimized to leverage any additional headroom from the 8150, and the GPUs are left in limbo with nowhere to go. A bit like sending tons of files to a printer for printing, but the printer itself can only print 1 page at a time. This is classic bottleneck territory if I've ever seen it, and it's so bad in this case that it's making a card that should be roughly 70 to 80% faster appear to perform on par. It's ridiculous. I mean, you could bump the resolution, but we already did that artificially in GTA 5, and the results were awfully similar. That's how horrid this bottleneck is. Now, Shadow of the Tomb Raider is next, and the story is, it's just as dismal. CPU usage inconsistently pegs 100%, meaning the game doesn't even know how to take full advantage of this architecture. I mean, technically speaking, since every 2 threads you're seeing here share resources, one could infer that if both halves add up to roughly 100% usage and GPU stats are way down, we're likely looking at an FPU or L2 cache bottleneck. Those are resources that are shared between 2 logical cores. The Achilles heel of the design to begin with is the FPU sharing and the cache sharing. Frame deltas are, I mean, they should be massive, right? But we're being held back, once again, by decade-old hardware. I mean, did you really expect this to go any other way when you clicked on the video? I honestly expected the card to be able to kind of flex its muscles a bit more, especially in titles like Witcher 3, which are, titles like that are generally GPU bound. I mean, even in 1080p max settings, right? It'd be easy to just justify 4K and say, oh, the system's great in 4K when we're leveraging just the GPU. That's an easy cop-out. But if you're looking for a 1080p, 1440p sweet spot, ultra high frame rates, something over 100 FPS consistent, it's not possible with a system like this, even when you have a beefy card like the RTX 3080. This is ultimately a huge fail. And I don't recommend that you do this, especially if you're on an old platform and you're just like, you know what, I just want to splurge on a beefy card like this. It should be able to pick up frame rates, right? I mean, this card's that strong. It should be able to just pull everything else in the system. No, sir, that is not the case. Even in titles where you would expect the graphics card to be leveraged a bit more than normal, the CPU is ultimately going to be the bottleneck. If you're on pile driver, bulldozer, anything before that, especially if you're talking about dual core systems, ouch. So either bump that resolution way up and hope your frame rates, you know, keep up, or ditch the platform, upgrade to even first gen Ryzen. If you can find a used Ryzen 5 1600 platform on eBay for maybe a couple $100, who knows? If RAM's included and the motherboard's included, that's not terrible. You'd have a much better experience than we had with the FX one. So it's about that time I bid thee farewell. It's what, 4 a.m. Eastern, and I haven't even finished editing this video yet, so we have a few more hours to go until the embargo lifts. Thank you for your patience. I know this is not a traditional, in-depth, formal review that you guys have come to expect from this channel. I apologize for that. There was really nothing I could do. It was out of my control. I figured this would be better than nothing. It would, you know, it'd be entertaining, satisfy your morbid curiosities, but I will upload a full review of the card and run it through the ringer with a proper CPU and with proper games as well. We're gonna push things to the limit in 4K and see what this card is actually capable of compared to its predecessor, the 2080, for essentially the same price. All that will come, just stay tuned. I didn't want to rush a review that wasn't complete and call it a formal 3080 review, so that's why I did what I did. But again, thank you for your patience. Leave a comment down below. You can buy this card, link below, and stay tuned for AIB cards as well. We have a few of those on the way. Those look super juicy, and a lot of them don't include, actually I think all of them that we're getting don't have this finicky, frankly annoying adapter. So there's that. If you guys like the video, again, thumbs up, consider subscribing, and I'll catch you in the next one. My name is Greg. I'm gonna nap now, but thanks for learning with me. I could legit nap just like this.